This is another of our weekly happiness classes. We normally do this in the world famous Speakers Corner in Central London, Hyde Park, UK. Usually lots of wonderful and very interesting people there, that's why we do it. But now that I'm here in the Middle East, in Jordan, that's why I'm wearing these baggy clothes, extremely hot weather. Yeah, we're trying to continue these things going. I've got my friends Dust and Simon, who I've met from Speakers Corner. We've got Josh as well, a friend of Dust. And we'll kind of maybe do a quick round of intros in a second, but let me just say, what is this happiness class about? It's about all things from personal to global, all life's issues. Those are the things we talk about. Hopefully when we've got this recorded on YouTube or put on YouTube, in the description be a link to the website bigquestionsanswer.com, where you can see the rest of our discussions. This is part of I would say a contiguous, complete course, I would say. Or I try to make it as much as starting from personal to more social to global issues, and we're on class 20, where we're talking about suffering. And so the first half hour, first 30 minutes will be about, well, we're going to try to focus on that topic by making a question out of it, which is suffering just in our minds? And then for the second half hour, we're going to try Dust's question, which is McDonald's a working class food, or is it, what was the word he used? I've already forgotten it now. Taking advantage of us. Is it exploiting the working class? So those are the two questions we'll be talking about, half an hour each. And so let's just go for it, I suppose. Intros to people. So I suppose I'll do a quick intro. My background, or my pigeonhole that I think is most relevant, is I'm a Muslim, and I value that as a revolutionary force in a academic way, not in a forceful way, and it's demonstrated it's the fastest growing religion in the world, and it has a very complete set of solutions to all the world's problems. So that's why I value that, and I use that, but I stick science and whatever logic to back up what it teaches, so I don't blindly follow. So that's my little intro there. Shall we, from where I can see, we've got a new friend, Josh. Josh, would you like to give yourself an intro of some sort?
Yeah, well, as I indicated before, from my own point of view repeatedly, because I kept hearing my own voice played back to me, I'm a member of the Workers' Party, led by the indefatigable George Galloway, and who I've had the pleasure of personally meeting, likewise the gentleman sat next to me. So yeah, and I talk a lot with politics, a lot about politics with Dust here. And that is that's my personal introduction. Did you want me to introduce the subject though again?
Just a brief intro to each of us. Rather me introducing you, you introduce yourself in your own words, sort of thing. So.
Yeah, I don't want to make it sound like a two getting to know you kind of thing. It's more of a I am me, and
you've nailed it.
You are you, and that's how it's going to be.
Level, yeah. Pigeonholing. Go for it, Dust.
My name is Dust, and I'm a philosopher. And I come towards virtually all my debates from an agnostic, rationalist, and democracy as being the forefront of my core understanding of reality and the solution to some of the horrors that we discussed in our chats before, and some of the chats we'll be talking about in the future. That democracy is fundamentally should be the bedrock of our different religions, our different beliefs, and as a community we grow together rather than growing further apart, which is the horror which I believe we've got to where we are today in this world.
Okay, Simon, so you're next according to my picture. I don't know how everybody else's pictures are going. So Simon, please introduce yourself in your own words, a few words.
My name is Simon. I'm more or less retired now. I'm on of leisure. I've had a lovely day today, meeting all my friends, drinking coffee, doing all my hobbies and interests. I'm out in my garden. I love my garden. And it was interesting to hear that the young man said that he's a fan of George Galloway. I love that guy. I watch Moats, Motherwell talk shows as often as I can. I think George Galloway is a breath of fresh air. He tells the truth. It's the sort of truth we're not getting from the mainstream media. But the beauty of it is, his channel is growing and growing and growing because people want food.
Even can I just say, even those who disagree with him on a lot of things, even those who are avowed capitalists, actually do. I'm not defending those people per se, but I'm simply saying that even they recognise the veracity in what he says. It's like, well, I could give a lot of examples we probably don't have time to go into, but even with those who disagree with him do recognise the validity of what he says and the rationale around that. So yeah,
that's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Cool.
And,
So go on. Yeah.
He has some great speakers on his show.
Cool. But yeah, cool. So we've got intro to Josh, Dust, and Simon, myself. Let's start with the first question, which is suffering something that's just in the mind? And so, as I was saying before we had all the terrible echoes and stuff, I'm not sure. I'm not going to say everything I want to say. I'm going to try to limit myself to one idea so that the next person, who would be Josh, could respond. And generally, anybody can respond to anything that was said before, but the main thing for me is that we don't talk past each other. We respond to everything that we feel like was said before, so it has a continuum and a proper conversation, and then the person adds to it in their own way. So my first point would be, yes, suffering, which I distinguish from actual pain. So pain is the physical sensation. Suffering, for me, the way I'm defining it personally, is the way you deal with it, I suppose. Suffering, you can overcome all suffering. I'm not saying everybody can. You can overcome all suffering. There's so many examples of that in history, and I think people understand it in psychology. Nietzsche pointed out, for example, if you have a why, you can overcome any how. I think I've said that the right way. Meaning that if you have meaning in your actions, you can overcome any problem. So that would be my first point, that yes, you can. And I'm not even just talking about the extreme situations of death. Like, it's important to have some sort of meaning, because even small things can destroy you if you don't have enough meaning in all your actions. So anyway, Josh, what are your thoughts? And of course, Dust, you can respond to what I've said earlier on, but as long as we kind of respond to what was said before, sort of thing, and then we add to it. Go for it, Josh.
Well, actually, I'm going to revise that a bit, because that echo was really off-putting. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, but as you know, we are probably we are one of the few cognitive species who is aware of our surroundings, and we don't just know that we feel. Sorry, we don't just feel our feelings. We know that we feel our feelings, and we also know the subjectivities, the nuances of feelings that we feel, and yet we also understand that actually we don't understand. We also appreciate the fact that we don't appreciate how complex it all is, because we keep trying to search for answers. And hence why somebody could always say it's always in the mind. Well, it is in the mind. It doesn't mean that it does not exist externally. Obviously, but obviously it's open to shades of interpretation about how you deal with the external stimuli that you're presented with. But obviously there are certain things that no matter what your rationale is, there are always going to be things that are viewed more positively or more negatively. And that is largely down to the stimuli itself rather than your interpretation of it. I hope that adequately answers the question, succinctly and adequately answers the question from your point of view. I know it is complicated, but that's because your question is very, very, very profound, as Dust would say.
Can I add in there as well?
You can add to it as well. I mean, was that would you want to make your own point? I mean, thank you for responding to my point. Do you feel like you want to add something, or that's your addition already?
Sorry, me? You asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, Josh. Yes.
Well, my point is that
from a political perspective.
Okay. From the political perspective, I mean, I think that we suffer largely because the irony is we are forced to accept reluctantly. Too many of us reluctantly accept the status quo, because we have been continuously inculcated to believe that it can't be any better than this, and that we deserve nothing more, and we are repeatedly convinced of our worthlessness, which essentially defines the suffering that we regularly experience. And it is actually a bit self-inflicted. I'm not trying to take the sides of those the higher order, if you like, that imposes it on us, but the fact of the matter is that I think we convince ourselves, ironically through our arrogance, that we are on some level better than the even less fortunate people than ourselves, and yet are somehow on par with those people who we are somehow not on par with those people with the powers that be, but we are somehow we try and make ourselves feel privileged and honoured by deluding ourselves into thinking that we're part of that, and totally removed from those who suffer even more than we do, just to make us feel good about ourselves. I know it's a long answer, but what I'm saying is it is self-inflicted because we try and make ourselves feel better about ourselves by putting others down and making us think that actually deluding us into thinking we're not the ones being oppressed, when we are. I know it's a long answer, but I can't just answer it in one sentence.
I'm getting what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, the more you explain it, the more I think I understand what you're saying. Cool. And I'm purposely not commenting because we're taking turns anyway, so I'm just remembering that. Cool. Dust, what's your thoughts? So what's your response to Josh? And then
maybe contract what I said, but...
the question.
Well, I think what Josh was saying and what's been said is of great merit, because if we can't define what pain is, how can we therefore define our next action, not only as an individual but as a community as well? I think defining pain, defining our capability to transcend pain with logic and reason is my own personal aim, of course, and I believe the aim of everyone, the majority of people that I meet in our communities. And I think being able to understand that pain is a terrible thing. Pain is a cruel entity to experience, because the energy that it can robs from us as an individual also robs from us as a community, and therefore to be able to make conscious decisions about our next actions to try and transcend our current situation is nigh on impossible, with pain being the dominant factor. And if pain is a dominant factor in our day-to-day lives, reason cannot transpire. What tends to happen if pain is a dominant factor in our communities or individual is desperation transcends from that. I think like World War II came a lot from feeling pain and despair, and therefore the solution presented to the community in that situation was horrific, and yet it was self-harmful, and
Self-defeating, ultimately.
self-defeating.
For those who instigated it.
But the point is that a society of an individual who doesn't experience pain as a whole can come with conclusions that are rewarding and beneficial.
Okay. So, I mean, so Simon, did you hear that? Because I know your camera's going on and off, but you could hear that, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, did you understand? I mean, you could ask Dust to clarify if there's anything you didn't understand. But did you have any understanding of what Dust was saying? And
Yeah.
and got any okay, cool. And what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, a really interesting topic. I'd like to come back to a point that Dust made shortly. It's a very interesting point. I'll say it now because you might have to remind me. It's about the need for the elites to inflict suffering on the less fortunate. If you can just remember that for me. My point is, if I was the creator, I would have to rethink the idea of introducing pain to the human being, because I've seen people suffer, and it's a terrible thing. The need for suffering for me is not acceptable. We don't need to have the severity of pain that people experience within certain illnesses. Again, I've watched people die of cancer, blah, blah, blah. Why do we have to have that suffering? Well, what's the need for it? The only thing that I can think of is we have pain to let us know that there's a problem. So if we know there's a problem, why do we need to overemphasize the need for pain? That's the first thing. Coming back to what Dust was saying, pain. Yes, there are people out there who love to inflict pain and suffering on others, and they enjoy it.
Yeah.
That's basically it in a nutshell for me.
And if you don't mind
Okay,
me,
so
can I just add to that?
Yeah, go
Sorry. I think it's very important to acknowledge a part of that statement is that these people that enjoy putting pain into our community and making that as a standard, standardizing, thank you, is these people are identified and selected for promotion. This is a conscious process designed into our current political system, and people that represent humanity and eliminating pain within reason, of course. Eliminating pain as a standard in our daily lives and communities are scorned, repressed, and ejected from any political process.
okay,
And
cool.
religion as well. They that's part of their process, inflict pain, in order to gain control.
Oh, okay. So yes, I see what you mean. So using religion to control people, I understand what you mean. Okay, so cool. So lots of interesting points I want to respond to. So suffering is other people's fault. So I do sometimes come into, and maybe Dustin, Simon noticed this, I come in with a certain angle because I thought about it with a certain angle, and the angle that I came in was from an individual's point of view, maybe because I didn't have too much time to think about it, so I just started thinking about what's my immediate response, where do I see a lot of the suffering, and that is from individuals who have the same experiences as others, yet they suffer more from the same experiences. And I think that, as I say, comes from a lack of meaning. But listening to everybody else here, I have overlooked, or just to say ignored, because I've been rushing in my thought process, the importance of society's effect on people. So I always try to put the responsibility as much as possible on the individual to fix their circumstances as much as possible, because that gives the individual agency, control, and they're less, let's say, it's better to reduce the victimhood of an individual, let's just say. But at the same time, there are definitely things we need to do as a society to make people feel less oppressed, suffer less, and that, for example, one of the greatest sufferings we have at the moment, and they are undervalued still, is loneliness. And that can be overcome if society is more responsible. And I think I want to keep using that word responsible, because I think we value this thing called freedom way beyond responsibility. So when I mean you say responsible, I'm talking about people feeling responsible and saying, we need to smile at other people. It sounds ridiculously small, but these things are kind of foundational. You need to smile at people when you walk past them. Don't go about your life like zombies do, like we do in London. We ignore each other, we don't smile, we don't recognize our neighbors and all these kind of things. And so if we take a more responsible attitude as a society, we can massively reduce suffering. But that requires a more responsible attitude to society. I'm going to try to be really quick as well. Another point that was really interesting that I think Dust and maybe a few other people made was suffering is systemic, is my sort of summary, because so basically I think Dust was saying, let's say psychopaths are encouraged as leaders. Psychopath is actually a psychological term. And I'm going to say something that sounds really strange. I consider myself a psychopath. It sounds terrible. This is actually a common feature or personality type of CEOs, people who start companies and stuff like that. It doesn't mean you necessarily want to kill people. So psychopath means you have less, you feel less, physically you feel less things. You don't feel socially awkward, for example. You do things without less care. Biologically, there's a difference. And maybe that's not what you meant, but that's how I actually do agree that psychopaths are encouraged, and in some ways do make better leaders if they temper their behavior or their biological things. So sometimes when you lead, you have to ignore the majority for the functioning of the company or whatever. I'm going to try to I know I'm taking a long time. So my point is, yes, it can be systemic, especially in an immoral society. And immoral, you have to define immoral, but I'll define it like, let's say generally when most people consider good and bad, and people, that's a very difficult topic. What is immoral behavior? But let's just say in immoral societies, we do encourage repression and not caring of the people, let's say, at the lowest or the poorest ranks of society. And so that's really bad. And we should work on that. And I agree that in a way, yes, in immoral societies, suffering and persecution is systemic, yeah. And then God has made him, so the last point was, what's it called? Simon's point, which is God has made a mistake in inflicting too much pain. The level of pain or the threshold is too much. And so from a religious point of view, my understanding and my experience of all sorts of, my limited experience is that there are no mistakes in the world and the function of the world, and God has up to perfect control of it. And for quoting from a verse of the Quran, but proving this is not an easy thing to do. It says there is no suffering that is beyond the ability of the person to take care of it. So that's paraphrasing a verse of the Holy Quran, and that's my experience from understanding people who suffer from cancer and so many other things, that we say we have a belief that that person is suffering in a certain way, but those people often tell a different story about their suffering and how eye-opening that suffering is. That doesn't mean not all people have a positive result from that suffering, but a lot of people do. So those are some of my thoughts. I know I spoke a lot. Sorry about that. Just so I kind of wanted to respond to all the different comments. So we could go to you, Dust, next, but I do feel like trying to keep it in order. So Josh, possibly next. I mean, if you got any comments to say,
well, just maybe I'm just abbreviating, shortening what I said earlier when it comes to suffering. In summary, the reason why people, and this is from either a moral or political point of view, I don't want to overly politicise it, but basically people inflict suffering on others to make them feel better about themselves, even when those who are inflicting the greatest amount of suffering are actually way worse than the seemingly ordinary citizens who seem to also take delight in it. Yeah, and even though the latter obviously fails to recognise that. Yeah.
I'd like to talk about the cancer subject you brought up. I mean, it's just I think, firstly, actually, sorry, before I do that, having psychopaths of any part of leadership is an absolute no-no at any leadership whatsoever. Emotions, feelings, you can have those and experience those and still come out with, use reason and logic to understand the world. Because you feel and because you can feel doesn't make, I believe, makes you the best leader. Because, as I shouldn't have to explain, the majority of the people in the world do feel, do experience, and that has to be taken into account and not merely ignored or superseded, or because you don't feel means you are superior. I think we should do a talk on that, because we're going off subject, by the way, with that a bit. I think there's a very important talk in there about psychopaths and the evolution and purpose of psychopath and their role today in a modern society. I think that should be another question. But you see, now just go back onto subject with suffering and cancer, is that because you adopt capitalism exploits our suffering. It wants to see people suffer more. Capitalism has no incentive to cure cancer, because the more people experience cancer and the more suffering that's created, the more it can exploit that scenario by charging more money for not curing it, but for remedies that alleviate it rather than actually cure any disease. But cancer is most notable because, yes, it is vastly complicated and there's so many of them, but still it's a great earner. It's a great earner. So, and
Market.
it's a great market. It's a market being created because if you don't offer, if you're not motivated to have a cure, therefore you create a permanent market where you can exploit that with remedies rather than actually dealing with the main problem, which may be air pollution, which may be the pollutants in our food, maybe other plastics, etc., etc., etc. Where
I was just going to say, maybe, sorry, I don't want to make you speak for you, but I was just going to say, also, with all the genetic engineering we can do, maybe the scientists who are responsible for that are actually making us more susceptible to cancer by altering. Well, no, actually, no. That's a bit outlandish. But the point is, they know how to wire. Supposedly, they know how to wire our genes to make us less prone to cancer, but they choose not to.
I'm not sure about that, but
It's a theory. No, it's only a theory. It's only a theory. I just say to consider it.
But we live in a society where alcoholism, drugs, and there's a lot of pollutants in our environment which contribute to terrible cancers. Rather than dealing with that, capitalism profits from trying to create remedies and hospitals that it exploits by charging to try and overcome the pain and horror that we're feeling. So yeah, privatisation of hospitals is also an absolute nightmare. And why would they therefore put any investment or money into solving the core problem or actual cancers when clearly making money from that is so easy?
Amongst other diseases as well,
And other diseases,
things
obviously
like HIV/AIDS, for example. Well, I could go on and on.
COVID, if we're allowed to use that word. These are promoted and developed these are not dealt with at the root because they know they can make so much money from the vaccines that...
At least we didn't have to pay for them directly, though. I mean, it came out of our taxpayers' purse, though.
We pay for it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, indirectly. It's underhand. It's underhand. Under the counter, almost literally.
Simon, so my connection is terrible, so I keep asking, did you heard it, all of it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Go for it. What are your thoughts?
As we all know, there are different levels of pain, and depending on how much money you've got, can depend on how much suffering you're going to be suffering, basically. So the economy has got a lot to do with whether you can go private or whether you've got to go to the national service. And what I've seen recently is I firmly believe that the system is trying to break the national service, to collapse it so that they can turn it into a private organisation.
Yes.
And that's got many issues. There are many issues involved with a system where it's based on insurance. But here's the thing, I might think I'm suffering here, which I'm not, by the way, but for somebody else in Africa, it's relative. I might not be able to pay my gas bill, but they might not even be able to afford one meal in one day. But it's all relative. We might think that we're poor or something. So we need to check ourselves, I think. Are we really poor? Are we really suffering? And coming back to that point of loneliness, you never hear of tribes in Africa or complaining. Wow, what was that?
Drone attack.
You
The
never
sound
hear
of
them
censorship.
complaining about being lonely because they're always together, and that's a reflection of the state of the economy. The economy drives us apart. Pain. There are different levels of pain. It's a case of, for me, what can you deal with? What's acceptable, and will there be anyone there to help you? Anyway, yeah, that's it from me.
Cool. So we've all pretty much done half an hour. Half an hour. But I'm gonna be a bit greedy, and I'm gonna try to. Should we do one more round, but as fast as possible? Is that all right? What do you think? Because I should have kind of given you some sort of warning. So, your final round off for what you want to say for this particular topic. What do you think, Dust? Because Dust is a co-presenter, so I'm interested. You're all right with that?
Well, I think it'd be quite nice if we all just proposed an idea of one of our own personal idea of how to overcome pain and leave on a solution on a positive note.
I love that. Thank you very much, Dust. So my solution, as in the Quran, and I think it makes a lot of sense, and I'll try to explain it in brief, is that if, and this is not just in the Quran, it's actually in all the Abrahamic faiths, which is fear of God is the root of all wisdom is what you hear in the Bible, but more precisely in the Quran it says that if you live your life in fear of judgment, you will have paradise in this world and the next. What does that mean? It means you have a high level view of your life that goes beyond even this life, and you make choices that have meaning. Everything you do, all the suffering you go through has meaning, and you will find in two ways that you will have a lot of peace, and as an individual you will suffer less, which is it have meaning, but also you will take lots. In religion only tells you to take positive actions, like be kind to people, and when you're kind to people eventually reciprocate in some way and positive things happen. And so that would be sort of, as an individual, that's how you can reduce suffering. And I see that all the time, and I see and I'm not hating on atheistic societies, but I think in more atheistic societies, and this is shown in psychological, also sort of like psychological studies, and psychologists, atheists are not agreed, religion has massively positive values in terms of happiness. We suffer a lot more for a lot smaller issues. And so, yeah, it's kind of a double answer. Like, if you live your life responsibly, that means you live it to serve other people, you feel happier, and you make your environment happier, so it creates a happier society. You're more comfortable. So I think improving your environment is very important. Sorry if I took too long. Josh, go for it.
Well,
I
say
solutions, as it does put it.
Yeah, no, okay. Problems are what we make of them. If we learn to empathise more with people's problems and recognise that we may not necessarily have the same problems they do, doesn't necessarily mean they're any worse or better than what we have, nor does it mean we will never have the same problems that they have. It's a bit like, if someone laughs at another for having cancer because maybe it was their fault because they smoked a long time. They may not feel the same way if they themselves had cancer, even if it wasn't self-inflicted. Going back to the reverting to the point of self-infliction. The point is that if we learn to empathise more with other people's problems and recognise that nobody is perfect, everybody has got their issues, and that we are not entitled to condescend or look down on other people just because we might not be as quite as badly afflicted at the moment in the present time as the other person. I think if we recognise that, appreciate that more, then I think we'll see hopefully we'll see a lot less evil in the world. But of course it's a massive leap to make, really, but one has to try.
Intriguing. So humanity, for it to grow and transcend the horrors that so clearly demonstrated not only in our recent times but in our past, is to acknowledge that pain is something that's designed into our societies and our communities by those who wish to corrode what is the best of us. And it's done on purpose, and it's done deliberately, and it is done with the intent, as I just said, to repress societies, like chaining. It's no different from chaining up an African slave and making them work for no money whatsoever in an American field. There is no difference whatsoever. So how do we unleash that pain? How do we make sure that our communities are not driven to the lowest level possible, but rather than the best? It's very simple. Acknowledge that what's most rewarding for an individual and the community is those ideas and concepts which reward our humanity and let our humanity have space to grow. And as always, done with compassion and honouring our traditions, whatever your tradition or faiths or religions are. And I don't believe there's any conflict with what I've said with traditions, as I believe that to be human is to acknowledge other people's differences.
Simon, what are your thoughts?
Well,
your solutions?
I believe that we have enough resources on this planet to reduce a massive percentage of suffering, whether it's starvation, lack of education, whatever it might be. I just think that I agree with what Dusty is saying to some degree, that we're designed as human beings to inflict suffering on people. We've not evolved as a human species sufficiently enough to understand that in order for us to survive, this is not the way we should be going. We should be sharing more. We should be using technology. We've got the technology there now to share, to prevent a lot of this suffering and pain. It's just a question of, as a human species, is that what we want to do? I don't think so.
Yeah, I think we're gone. Sorry.
Yeah, we'll always remain in this state of mind. Well, not all of us. I think some of us are more enlightened than others, which is a great thing. It's a wonderful thing. People like Dustin, his friend, they're enlightened. They're on a different level. And yourself. We are on a different level from these other people. In fact, I think we've evolved slightly more than these other people in terms of compassion, love, respect, etc.
Cool. So I think we're all doing the nod to avoid doing too much talking, and keeping the conversation going forever, because we could keep this going forever. Let's jump to the next question. So it was. So I've paraphrased it myself. So what was the exact question again? I've reduced it to, is McDonald's exploiting the poor? But the way you phrased it originally, Dust, was, back in my intro, was, is McDonald's working class or exploitation of working class? Since it's your question, I think, would you like to start?
I think that seems very logical indeed. So is McDonald's working class, or is it an instrument of exploitation of the working class? And if you don't mind, I'll just give a brief example of what I'm trying to say is, so it's sold to us as like Weatherspoons and other institutions that are of that sort of level as a normality to which to experience life with, and it's a normality which to go there and treat your family, or because it's treat your family, or treat as a place for the working class / middle class as well, go there, and the community to go there and experience happiness, experience eating, community, and all those facets which are revolved around drinking, because also I'm trying to include Weatherspoons as well, and eating, and they've somehow exploited that market, take ownership of that market. But what is the actual, what's behind the curtain? So I fundamentally disagree that they are actually working class institutions, and I fundamentally agree with their absolute exploitation, because at the heart of this is McDonald's is an organisation destroying the health of the working class, destroying it with fatty food, with additives, reducing life expectancy due to the health problems which transpire from that, and also they're destroying workers' rights across the world. They lobby governments to make sure that the working wage is as low as humanly possible. They lobby governments to make sure that the workers' rights are as reduced as possible, and that their paying tax into a government is reduced as much as possible, because it's tax which fundamentally defines the level of the working class, because it's tax that is needed to fund health services, education, science, and making sure that environmental agencies, food agencies, which which try to assess the level of quality of food which is actually required. Literally, people like McDonald's are undermining that. And then we come to the advertising. Their advertising is appalling, aiming a product so dangerous and full of sugars and fat, but it's aimed dominantly at working class children, not even the adults. And the children, they use toys and other insidious devices to circumnavigate our conscious minds and plant themselves into our children, who grow up as this as a normality, when, as I've just listed before, their crimes are profound. The way that they introduce work 0 hours, the way they destroy the environments in other countries to produce the meat,
Right.
and the environmental damage done in other and of course absolutely no working rights whatsoever in other countries. And yet we have proof that it doesn't need to attack workers' rights for McDonald's to exist. It's in Denmark, where they give, I think it's $22 minimum wage to the lowest staff in McDonald's in Denmark, and yet McDonald's works perfectly well and makes profit. And those workers have, when they leave the environment of McDonald's and go out into their country, they experience wonderful education, wonderful and clean environment. Most of it's now renewable energy. So you can still have an organisation like McDonald's functioning and still be genuinely a working class entity, because Denmark has proven that that is the case. But I'd just like to add on one more point. Capitalism, which is what McDonald's is one of the leads as, is across the world trying to drive down all the time human rights, working rights, environmental rights. They are driven to that. That's, I believe, their main product, not food as being their main product. I believe their main product is the reduction of what I've just listed. Thank you.
Okay. So, thank you very much for that. So, because I want to keep to the order, I think Simon would be next. I don't know if your picture goes with my picture, but Simon's on my far left. So Simon, what are your thoughts? What are your response to what Dust has got to say, Dust has said,
Right, well,
and anything else you want to add to it?
Spot on. I don't think places like McDonald's and
So I don't want to interrupt you, but your picture is not showing. I'd love to see your face if possible.
We can see it.
We can see it.
Yeah,
We've got it.
Oh, really?
It's been
So
on our
that's
screen.
right.
It's been recorded.
Yeah.
I'm amazed that
Interesting.
anybody would want to see my mush.
Yeah, you
But
beautiful
anyway,
man,
yeah,
you.
yeah.
I love seeing your face.
And your
But I love seeing your
tomatoes.
face. Carry on. Anyway.
But
We'll
yeah,
go
I
very
don't
soon,
think
so.
these food outlets initially started out by wanting to destroy people.
Sorry about that.
It's another drone
I don't know
attack.
what that is.
The washing machine.
Sounds
No,
like a
no,
head-
it's we're in a farm area. I'm not sure what that is.
Could be an exocet.
Yeah.
You never know, going over towards Iran. But anyway, yeah, coming back to what I was saying, I don't think these food outlets initially started out to destroy the people the way they are today. Because I remember going back 40 odd years ago, the food used to be quite good, believe it or not. But what they've done is they've taken certain ingredients out and they put other ingredients in, and we don't know what they are. We don't know what the ingredients are, what it is they're actually putting in this food. And coming back to Duff's point about destroying the economy, destroying people's wages. I mean, zero contract hours, really? Getting in agency workers, really? Getting rid of full-time staff, really? And they've not got holiday pay, they don't get overtime, they don't get bonuses, and it gets even worse. If you work for the guy who's got a franchise, then it's open season for the managers or the owners of that franchise to do exactly what they want. Surely that cannot be acceptable in today's society, but that's how it's going. It seems to be that they're driving us, they want to drive us into absolute poverty. Unless people start to say, I'm sorry, this is no longer acceptable, and it's starting to happen now, people going on strike. If you can't pay for the basics in your house, then there's going to be trouble. But for me, the biggest point for me is the way staff are treated, and they're not compensated. For the hard work that they do. I mean, some of these people are walking around for 12 hours, and they look like zombies at the end of the shift. And just one more point. I don't use these places. I stick to what I've got in my garden. Grow your own, and you won't have a problem. That's all I've got to say. Oh, and we basically we need to start teaching kids to grow their own, be independent, become farmers.
Yeah. All right. So I suppose it's my turn in the circle, if that's okay. So basically, yeah, it's hard to disagree, but I was going to add to the comment. So the thing about no workers' right not being paid enough, that's a particularly interesting one, because for my research, beef production, if you want to call it that, is actually subsidized by governments. So it's the reason why McDonald's, which is one of the biggest, not surprisingly, biggest buyers of beef or meat in the world, can sell their products so cheap, and why they're so a massive reason why they're so popular is because governments are basically helping them. Our taxpayers' money is encouraging this overeating frenzy. And so it's strange that governments are basically helping them, and yet they're underpaying people. So that's one thing I should add. There are so many good points that I'm really interested in. So food quality going down. So yes, I think that's true. McDonald's probably had a higher standard, and the reason why I believe McDonald's probably had a higher standard, besides the movie I watched, which was called The Founder, where they basically, in one example, you stopped using real milkshakes and just powder milkshakes instead. But apparently, I think I'm not going to go into that. But anyway, but I do believe the standard will keep going down, and there's a reason for that. And with my kind of main point, my main point is that the industrialization of food happened because we undervalued, and it might sound really strange and we don't really think about this much, we undervalued the housewife or the mother. Now that sounds completely crazy.
No, it's good, yeah.
But the whole process of fast food and prepared food, that whole industrialization of food started in the 1950s when women were told, you're more valuable making money than taking care of children or producing homegrown food. So in the 1950s, it was normal to have your own cow, grow your own food and stuff like that. We've been grown out of that. And as I always like to produce material. There's a great video, TED Talk, which hopefully we upload this video. I'll link it to that whole process. And that TED Talk was not actually about how women are pivotal to not having industrialized food, but that's kind of what came out through his timeline. So in Islam, because I'm always talking about the spirituality side of things, there's a beautiful, I'm going to try to stop it. I'm going to quote this beautiful saying, which I love so much, and I'll end my little comment. A man asked Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who has the most claim to my duty or my care or my love? It's always a bit difficult translating from the Arabic, which is quite a very poetic and intense language. But anyway, who has the most right to my love? He was asked. Prophet Muhammad was asked by a follower, and Prophet Muhammad said, your mother. And then he said, after that, who should I love? And he said, your mother. And he said, after that, who should I love? He said, your mother. And then who should you marry? Who should you love after that? Your father. And then others who are, after him, after him, others kindred according to their degree of kinship. So you get the idea, right? And so when you really start valuing your mothers and the role of the mothers in taking care of the heart of the family, that is the real solution to fixing this. And I'll make my second point, where there are lots of examples of how this problem is being or has been fixed, or we've never even got into the problems we have in the West in terms of dependence on fast food. Anyway, so that's my point. Sorry, could you hear that?
I need to pause you here just for a technical reason.
Yeah.
I think Simon's microphone is becoming a nuisance. Yeah, I don't know if it's the headphones, if his headphones moving or something, but it's dominating the proceeding is the headphone. So if you can stop moving, or that might resolve it.
How's that?
Yeah, I can't. Okay, yeah, I've had kind of horrible sounds all the way through, so I don't know what it was. So, but right now it's actually pretty good. What about you? Maybe I didn't realise. I thought it was just my rubbish connection or something.
It's coming from Simon's camera. I mean Simon's sound.
Mike.
Wow.
Japanese phones.
You just can't move.
No,
I think the microphone's on your headphones, so I think that's what's happening.
Oh, it's a scrape. Okay.
Probably.
Okay. Cool. Okay, so thank you for
Sorry to interrupt,
Simon, for being a statue for us as much as you can. Without moving, stop breathing. Josh, what were your thoughts?
Well, I have got some very, very encouraging news, although maybe from somewhat unlikely sources or unlikely case studies. In 2017, and this is only less than 5 years ago now, there was strike action for the first time in Britain since McDonald's opened its first stores in 1974. Okay, they're only a small minority, but it certainly is an encouraging start. A small minority of their workers did actually take a collective strike action, demanding an end to 0 hours contracts and a minimum wage of £10, which is basically a little above the UK-wide living wage. Yeah.
We want better than a minimum wage. We want
no, I know, but living wage. Yeah. Brings us to our brought me to a point I made earlier with Dust here about why there needs to be not a living wage but an optimum wage.
Optimum.
Yeah. I coined the phrase. Well, we coined the phrase.
You coined the phrase.
Well, we can say all right.
I was looking for a phrase that was better.
All right, Josh,
yeah.
Take it.
Okay, all right.
Take it.
Yeah. So there is hope that the conglomerate is beginning to, well, shall we say, deglomerate. Well, is beginning to deglomerate. Agglomerate. Anyway, I was trying to make a bad pun there. The point is, it has faced. It is already facing challenges in Britain, and like I said, even though it hasn't actually been in Britain for as long as you would expect, because it came back in when was McDonald's introduced? It was like
1974.
No. That's when it came to Britain. I'm talking about when it was founded. Oh, we'll have to look that up. Anyway, another case study, believe it or not, comes from Russia. Believe it or not, in response to the sanctions against Russia, its incumbent president has actually closed and renationalised all of the entire Russian McDonald's franchises, which is a dramatic reversal of Mikhail Gorbachev's so-called reforms, where he allowed McDonald's to taint the health of its Soviet citizens. So, and I'm not an apologist for the Russian president at all. But if there is one positive thing that has come out of the war that he escalated, it's definitely that a multinational conglomerate is facing an existential threat to its power from an unlikely source.
And what was because we're trying to keep making respond to the previous person, that would be me.
Yeah, of course,
what was your thought about the power of the housewife in
yes. No, I was going to go on to that if we had enough time. I wasn't quite sure.
Let's do that.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I certainly think that capitalism does try to erode family values. Of course, I think I'm not sure if we should. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I believe, if I believe in the housewife, I also believe in the house husband. It shouldn't always be the woman down to the woman to stay in the house. Having said that, if the woman wishes to stay at home, she shouldn't be negatively encouraged to have to work. When I say negatively encouraged, I mean being told that she must now be the breadwinner and not the husband. I think that is maybe not necessarily the right thing to. That isn't really the right thing to say, any more than it would be to say that it's always down to the woman to stay at home. By the same token, so. I certainly think that just to balance it out a bit, I think that the family unit has to be an equal party, but we mustn't allow capitalism to delude us into thinking that is the answer, because it's actually making parents less able to care for their children because they have to work longer hours and spend less time with their children because of increased cost of living.
Very good.
Yeah. So capitalism is actually, in that respect, in another guise, in a very familial sense, eroding workers' rights further.
Can I just add something as well, please? And it's important to know that life isn't just one choice. You work or you don't work and have to be a certain model. Life should be about working and having enough time to still be able to contribute not only to your family but to the community. And one purpose behind McDonald's is to destroy that vital human right. And
you could make the point the fast food industry is actually encouraging parents to spend less time with their children, because hence it's fast food, by discouraging them from cooking.
Fast food, and not only McDonald's is guilty of this, but Weatherspoons and Greggs and
Little Chef,
and other instruments in our society. Their role is decaying family values. And as you rightly put, you can have a house husband, but you shouldn't be about a choice about just being one thing. You can be multiple roles in your community or family, but work should support that, not take away from that. And in the current system, we are denied the opportunity to be able to have choice over A, B, C or D. It's you work every hour, or you're a failure and will be punished accordingly as a failure.
Sorry, I've got mosquitoes flying around here.
Sorry, we have flies outside.
Simon, what are your thoughts about what Dust has said, and then your own points?
Many important points that raised there. Again, we could have a debate on just one of the points made. But I'm one of 8, and my mother spent all her time just washing, cooking, cleaning, getting us off to school, bringing us back, washing, cleaning, cooking, and we were brought up on a small farm, pigs, ducks, chickens, goats. That initial foundation of good quality food, our own vegetables, our own food, has stood me in good stead for the rest of my life. Thank goodness. Because of that initial, upbringing and education.
Was that your point?
I've never been ill. Because of that foundation, I've never been ill one day in my life, and I'm always active. And it's the knowledge that you take on in your life, the skills that you learn. Many of these skills young people are losing or don't even have them. And I firmly believe at some point we're going to have to come back to these farming skills. Just one more point. Just saying about, the other gentleman saying about how the wages are going up with McDonald's. If they're paying £20 an hour, we can all go there and get a job. £20 an hour? That sounds pretty good to me. What do you reckon, lad? What do you reckon?
Yeah.
I could see myself in a little pinny serving burgers.
Yeah, and you would be respected at that wage. You respect people. It's hard to respect people. You should do, though, by the way. But it's hard to respect people that are on £7 or less pounds an hour. It's just...
That's absolutely right. You're right, Justin. What does it do to the psyche? You don't care. You're not bothered. You're not really interested in the job. You don't perform. And that reflects internally with the customer. They know what's going on. So you're spot on with the wages, bro.
Cool.
If you want a good job too, pay the money.
Oh, I just realised where the circle started again from Dust. Can we go back to Dust and do our final solutions, as it were, for the McDonald's problem? Go for it, Dust.
Well, the solution is having enough power as an individual to be able to articulate the world that we want, both verbally and politically, and that comes with education, and it comes with respect and understanding, and again compassion about the world around us. I mean, Denmark has demonstrated that you can have an entity like McDonald's exist and still be rewarding to society, rather than being this constant need for the McDonald's everywhere else in the world and capitalism to drive to the lowest quality humanly possible, both in food, environment, and the human entity.
If you like, the common denominator.
The common denominator as a human shape, and that means the lowest in a community. And so
the scrape is happening. Is that?
Yeah,
it can't be you,
Simon's.
The poor guy is still. He's not moving. Is it me?
Like a statue.
I'm purposely trying to be still. He's still. But it is coming from your sound somehow. The bars. I don't know how he. Poor guy, he's not even moving. He should be allowed to breathe, you know. I think you're breathing, Simon. I think that's the problem.
Let me see if I can hold my breath.
Anyway, so the solution.
Okay, go on, sorry.
I'm afraid the solution is requiring an education being allowed to happen, and a conversation amongst the workers of the world, to coin a phrase, but not with intent to overthrow, not with intent of jealousy or envy or anything like this. This is not the initial...
Maybe a bit of healthy competition.
Anyway,
No, fair competition.
with the result of just creating what was the word not a decent
Optimum wage.
with the aim of only creating the optimum wage so that human being and therefore a family, instead of living in fear and pain through every day, can actually wake up feeling respect for themselves and therefore respect for others, because that's crucially what's required as a base in our society. Because if we can't respect ourselves, you sure as hell can't respect another human being. And at that point, you instantly create into a society horrific conflicts and other horrors further down the road.
Cool. Simon, what are your solutions to this
If
problem?
you increase the wages, you get better productivity. You'll have more income then to spend on better ingredients. With the better ingredients, you get more people going there to eat this delicious food, and everybody will be happy. But because you're inflicting hardship and pain on the workers, it's reflecting on everyone. And these companies are making enough money to be able to give extra money to the staff. You've got to be happy. Start being happy.
Cool. So I think it's my turn now. So the solution, kind of as I hinted, and I think there are real examples of the solutions happening already, is that we don't get sucked into this situation where we're at the mercy of these fast food companies if we keep the family structures intact. And so a comment was made, maybe you can have house husbands and things like that. I do think that I do agree that husbands should play a role in as much as they can, but I do believe in specialization, and I do believe that we shouldn't ignore biology. And there's medical proof that, for example, women are better at taking care of children, things like that. So, and the reality is that the only places I know where the family structure is being maintained are in Muslim countries. And so you can theorize in all sorts of ways what works. And I definitely don't advocate forcing anybody in anything, but loads of Muslim women love being housewives. So it's not like they've been oppressed, which is also something we shouldn't do. We shouldn't just imagine people are oppressed because they don't do things the way we do things. Let's say we in the West, let's say. So my point is that a bit kind of going on to the really good point Simon made, when you have a family structure, what happens is you get good food and you get good tastes. You don't get addicted to the sugar dense, salt dense, addictive fast food. And so what you have in Jordan, where I am in the Middle East, which is a very religious country, both Muslims and Christians here, where family structures are really strong, people eat their snacks are not chocolate but carrots and seeds and tea, and they don't really eat McDonald's, and they don't depend on it, and they're really poor and they manage. So that's my short answer. And Josh, you have the final say.
Well, this is going to be a very multi-layered one, so I hope we've got time.
Yeah.
Maybe controversial.
Lay it on.
Okay, all right, okay. Well, a lot of these regimes that would be regarded as repressive to women in the Middle East would be regarded by Western citizens, in theory. The irony is that a lot of them were actually created by Western colonial powers in the first place. Honestly, the founder of the modern Saudi regime was armed by the British in the shortly after the First World War. So, and then you've got the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, who were the predecessors of the Taliban. They were armed by the CIA and trained by the CIA. So in fact,
Christian.
well, yeah, whichever way you want to play it, but word it. But the point about it is that a lot of this repression is actually sponsored by the West anyway. If this alleged repression, because I know that there are
I'm just going
actually
to be plugging in my laptop. You just carry on. Sorry.
yeah.
Brilliant, by the way.
Yeah, but you can still hear me, Khalid.
Yeah. Oh,
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Yeah,
I've got
yeah.
headphones in, yeah.
But do not misunderstand my comments, okay? There is, in a lot, I do actually admire Islam's family values, hence why they have a still comparatively stable demographic with a youngish population compared to the Western populations, which are aging because their family values are being progressively eroded. And so that they're facing, we're facing, well, not so much in Britain. Our birth rate is actually still comparatively high compared to a lot of other European countries, but certainly in a lot of other Western countries, it is crashing through the floor, and this is creating a very serious demographic crisis. But anyway, I'm veering a bit off the tangent. My point about it is, when it comes to family values, I do honestly think that, that it is a complete delusion to think that the family unit is being preserved by capitalism, at least in Britain. It certainly is not, because, both the husband, the wife, and now the children of the same household are all having to work and work longer hours and having to spend less time with one another. And as I said before, a lot of these regimes that ostensibly, that supposedly are repressive towards women, were actually largely a product, or at least are in some way propped up by Western countries in the first place. So it's if you want a dictionary definition of irony, if you want a paradigm for irony and paradox, I just said it, and it's probably worth repeating a few times to anybody who's curious to know.
Cool. So, my earphones did go out for a second, so I'm not sure if I heard the whole thing, but generally I'm going to be listening to the whole video, and I think all of us feel free to comment and keep the discussion going in the YouTube comment section if you want to, and I also welcome obviously people not just in the panel but the viewers to get into discussion, say what you think. I always like responding, but that's just my little thing that, check out the comments. But Dust, I'd like you to the final summary and outro.
Well, I think the discussion of the last hour and a bit has been absolutely incredible, so I'd like to thank you very much for hosting this. We've all, I believe, contributed wisely, carefully, and with the dream and idea of discussing ideas that don't normally get the attention that they deserve, and we've all honoured our principles and communicated in such a way that I believe we should be very proud of each other.